We've set a challenge for 2 history teachers from Aylesbury High School in Buckinghamshire. They're on their way to the historic village of Ashwell. The challenge is to create a lesson that investigates how the Black Death affected this village. The ingredients: a church that dates back to the 13th century, which contains medieval graffiti written at the time of the Black Death, and a box containing 3 resources specially chosen by experts. These are the vital components for their lesson. There's also 2 local historians who'll be on hand to offer their assistance. Milkman Peter Greener, who runs the local museum, and Shepherd David Short, a keen local historian.
All places have a history, and all places have an interesting history. It's a matter of finding out what's interesting about it.
But right now, neither teacher knows their destination or the topic.
Hartford, what's at Hartford?
Don't know.
Our 2 teachers are Ian Annett, Head of History, and Ian Ochiltree, an NQT.
I'm not your typical 22, 25-year-old NQT. I've got a lot of different experience behind me. What I do bring is my enthusiasm for my subject. I'm an enthusiastic historian.
For the challenge, Head of History Ian will be coaching NQT Ian.
For this experience, it was always going to be more about Ian and what he could do with that, with those objects. I mean, we work very closely together, and I forget he's an NQT.
Let's hope NQT Ian gets coached well, because by 2 p.m. this afternoon, he needs to be ready to teach.
OK, we've got a church plan.
A series of quotes.
It's 8:30 a.m. and our 2 history teachers are already looking for clues.
Agriculture may play quite a big part in this.
It's looking a lot like we're doing something about it.
For NQT Ian, it's his first time teaching outside his classroom.
It will be very interesting to see whether the strangeness of the situation, the fact that they're outside a classroom, whether that changes their approach to their learning.
This could be a challenge for everyone, teacher and pupil alike.
I haven't had a proper history lesson outside class, but the trips have just sort of added to our knowledge.
Because you're learning about it, but you don't get to see the sites that you're looking at. For example, we did castles, but you may not have seen one, or actually what you're writing about, you can't have seen it before.
I think we might be going to Ashwell.
I reckon.
This is great, look at this.
Look at the size of that church here.
Yeah, it's a monster.
First stop in Ashwell is at local historian David Short's house.
We believe you can help us.
Well, I hope so. Come in.
Thank you. Ooh, box.
Yes, I've been asked to give you this key so that you can open this box.
Yeah, well. Right. Wow.
Well, what?
Well, I can see something that says Black Death, which is going to be important.
We've got TVD.
Watch me. Is there anything that says drink me?
How did the Black Death affect this
Ah,
village?
right, okay.
We're assuming that the Black Death affected the village.
We have some graffiti in the church.
Oh,
The
right.
church
Okay,
is made of
fantastic.
chalk and very
Yeah.
easy to scratch.
Yeah.
And there's some graffiti there referring to the Black Death of 1349-50.
Right.
So we know that the Black Death affected the village itself.
These numbers then might refer to the location of the graffiti.
Yeah, because these are columns and they'd be quite easy to access, won't they?
Black Death picture. These are one of those fairly standard pictures of
Yep.
death visiting the ailing victim,
Yes.
comforted by the priest. And we have
Okay. Religious dimension.
and we have a series of quotes, and these are contemporaneous. These are
No, it's Boccaccio, aren't they?
These are 14th century
Yeah.
quotes. We may be asking the students to find a way to use these sources in their understanding.
It's also going
Or-
to give them a sense of what people thought about it at the time. We've got symptoms, we've got causes.
We need to read these properly.
Yeah.
And a horseshoe. Horseshoe.
This could be movement. This
So-
could be migration, couldn't it?
Yeah.
This could be people getting on their
Yeah.
not horses, but
An idea to have a look at the DVD
and then go on and have a look at the graffiti itself and see how it fits in.
The DVD holds some vital tips from the two experts who chose the resources. The quotations and the horseshoe have come from Muriel Jeter from the Museum of London.
I'm Muriel Jeter. I'm a curator here at the Museum of London. In our medieval gallery at the Museum of London, we have a big display about the Black Death. It's obviously a huge event, catastrophic event that affected Britain. The Black Death originally arrived in England, in Weymouth, in the summer of 1348. Of course, in medieval times, before the time of cars and so on, the major form of transport was on horseback. So this is why I've chosen this horseshoe, which I've chosen because it's symbolic of one of the ways in which the plague or the Black Death was spread. It was mostly spread by shipping around the coast and up rivers and so on. But one of the ways that it was also spread was via land along the roads. I mean, the effect on anywhere, a large city or a small town, would have been absolutely terrible. I mean, up to half the population could have died, and in some places more than half the population died. So if you can imagine, you know, half of everybody you know and you see on a daily basis is just dying one by one by one, it must have been absolutely horrific. Because this is a real 14th century horseshoe, we can't actually lend it out for the programme to be used in the lesson. While we do let people handle objects, we only let them handle them in the museum with museum staff present. So for the first of the programme, you're using modern horseshoe, which is going to be a symbol of this 14th century one. I've chosen another thing which isn't an object. It's a list of quotes, original quotes about the Black Death written by people at the time. And the reason I've chosen this is because I think it's so important to try and understand how people saw the Black Death when it was occurring. Some of them say things like, dreadful fire descended from heaven.
We identified that, didn't we?
And caused by the sins of men. I really think it would help the children to imagine what it would be like if they were living back in 1348 and these events were happening to them.
The things that we got were actually quite straightforward. The horseshoe was the most ambiguous one.
The quotations, which sort of rooted us in some sort of historical scholarship that was always going to be useful.
The final resource, a reproduction of a page from a medieval manuscript, has been contributed by Roger Walsh from the British Library.
Despite medieval manuscripts being the best record we have of the Middle Ages, there's surprisingly little specific illustration around the Black Death. But what we've chosen here is a manuscript that dates a little bit after the Black Death itself of, say, 1350, but which deals with the medieval relationship to death. And this illustrates perfectly one of the most fundamental moments in life in the Middle Ages. The moment of death was viewed as crucially important. I think there's a few ways an illustration like this could be used in a lesson. The first thing to do, I think, would be just to explore the source itself, to begin to look at the text that's around it. And this is a very interesting manuscript because it is written in Middle English. It's unfamiliar but familiar. And that's quite satisfying when you've worked it out. It's almost like decoding a puzzle, in a way.
Though it be late, ere thou mercy came.
Did I read that as
Yeah, mercy thou shalt have. The picture, to me, was very evocative. And it's an image that I would have used in the classroom along with other images to try and draw out the religious nature of this disease.
But the picture very quickly gave us a sense of where this was going. And people's faith is so profound in those periods, profound enough to survive seismic shocks like the Black Death.
Before they set off, local historian David has some information about the church they're about to visit.
But the other thing is, as you walk into the church, you go through a lich gate.
Yeah.
And then on the left-hand side, you'll notice there's a triangle of ground there that is much higher than the rest, and there's no graves on it.
Is that a plague mound? Is that a plague
oral
pit?
tradition has it that is the plague grave.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that church...
It's imposing, isn't it? It's really imposing.
And that's the third thing. We talked about, you know, the church being, for the girls, as, you know, they come into church and they're going to look at connect it to faith, and they're going to connect it to this graffiti that we're going to see. But the other thing they've got to get from it is just the scale of it, because it tells us a lot about this community.
This is called Arms Lane, so this is probably either the site of some alms houses or maybe an arms procession from the civic centre to the religious centre.
And this is the bit of high land he was talking about.
This bit here?
See how it's a bit higher?
Yeah. Plague victims were seen as often as victims of their own sin, so probably you wouldn't put them in consecrated ground. It is slightly more raised than the surrounding. This might be a good moment to link that religious character of the Black Death with its effects on the community. Okay.
Wow. Hello.
Oh, hello.
You look like you're coming to meet us.
I'm what they call a church welcomer.
Nice to meet you. I'm Ian.
I'm Ian Hannett.
What a beautiful church. It's beautiful.
It is beautiful, yes, yes.
When does it date back to?
Well, what you can see is 12th, 13th century.
Interesting that it's 12th, 13th century, because you know our focus, I don't know if you know anything about our task, but our focus is obviously going to be on the impact of the Black Death here.
Yes, yes.
We have a map. I believe
yes.
you can show us some graffiti. And we've got a curious map with some references, which I would imagine are the points that we might want to look at. This will be familiar to you?
Yes.
Now, we met David, and he also said there's some graffiti around the tower.
The graffiti, the truly medieval graffiti relating to the Black Death are in the tower. Well, those are medieval scribblings about archdeacons and their shortcomings and things like that.
That might be useful to see anyway.
Well, they're rude about their archdeacons.
Yes.
I hope so. Well, we should definitely see it. If only for curiosity's sake, we should see it. Okay, let's have a look at the... So is this must be really famous.
Oh, it is, yes. Now, that's the graffiti, but 2 courses below, you've got the most famous, and it's in a quite a beautiful early English hand. And it reads, some of it, rather like the text that people send on mobile phones, because a little bit's left out. It is abbreviated.
So our student will decipher it immediately.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes.
And what does it say? Because
you've got the date, the MCT very large, and above that you've got Pestilente, yes. There's a little line above the top, and that's their form of shorthand, Motetta. And then underneath there's a record of the great storm which followed almost immediately. And there are lots of theories about it. Some people say, well, the tower was only half built and so they were standing on scaffolding. But most commonly, it's thought that they were going to keep a record of events, and that's why it starts at the top with the earliest. And then comes down, because the mighty wind comes after the plague.
Yes, I see. Do they regard the mighty wind as the end of the plague? Is that is there some sense that they think that's what blows the plague away?
I think it does happen, because I think it does happen that this is what builds on their theory of miasma, that bad air causes the plague, and so you get this storm that blows it away.
Those theories last until 19th century.
Yes, it did. Well, still into the 20th. When I saw the church, I was quite pleased for myself, because I've done some training in how to use a church as an artefact. So I was hoping that wouldn't interfere, and it's always hard as a mentor to let your mentee off the leash, and so I was hoping that I wouldn't step on Ian's toes too much and direct him.
The graffiti on the pillars, I just picked out a few which I thought were...
I'm a historian. I like old buildings and I like churches, so I was quite excited to get inside. Jenny was lovely. She was really helpful, very interesting.
Partly obscured by that, the archdeacon is an ass. It's very difficult to read.
Yeah. Do we know when this is from?
Obscured is an ass. No, but it is medieval, late medieval.
I think when we started to see the graffiti, we saw the graffiti in the tower and on the pillars, and the range of resources in the printed sources dictated where we were going to go with the lesson, I think. So by the time we were in here and we were talking to Jenny, it was starting to take shape.
If you go to the museum, you'll find a very good display of artefacts, but they've also got a lot of documents, and Peter Greener is extremely knowledgeable. Right. There's hardly a question you can ask about Ashwell that he can't answer.
He sounds to be our man, then.
He's the man we need to talk to.
Yeah. Thank you.
But you've been very helpful as well. Thank you very much.
Ashwell Village Museum opened in the 1930s and is full of historic curiosities. Curator Peter Greener has a book which describes a significant incident that happened in Ashwell just before the Black Death.
We have tucked away in a little book here transcripts of the court rolls of the Abbot of Westminster. The Abbot wanted to enclose a field, and the inhabitants of Ashwell were a bit incensed with this, and they pulled down all the fences and everything and did thousands of pounds worth of damage.
Peter, who wrote this? Can you tell us?
Well, it's a book called Stories of History, and it was made especially for teachers, I think.
Right, okay. But we can trust it from as being...
I think from looking at the other stories, they're transcribed from the actual documents.
Right, okay, so we can trust it as a...
And these documents are very difficult in the original. They're all in... I think they're in Latin.
Yeah, that might be quite useful, as I said.
Some of the people who had been quarrelling in this year were to quarrel again, and much more seriously in the next year. Peter Bottiglione was one. He was the abbot's servant.
In 1349, there's a gap in the series of his court rolls. That might be quite intriguing for the girls to hear, telling them the topic.
We can start with this.
Yeah.
This would be really useful, I think.
Very.
If it's all right with you, we'd like to borrow it for perhaps the afternoon.
Yes.
Promise to get it back to you.
Okay.
In the same condition. Thank you. The book that David gave us was very useful and opened up a whole alternative way of teaching this.
What he gave us was a great court roll source.
Now they've got all the ingredients, and with their Year 7 pupils arriving shortly, it's time to start planning.
They need to know something of what happened in this village, what the Black Death was.
The place has grown up around the leavings of that event. So the graffiti and the court rolls, the place has continued and it's left as those things, and we can interpret them. So I think that's been eminently valuable, that they will now have in their heads. They won't have just an abstract concept of a disease called the Black Death that came to England or swept through Europe in the mid-14th century. They'll have a concrete example of a place that experienced it.
Because they're already on a mystery tour, they don't know why they're here, and the whole task is a bit mysterious to them. I think we should use that idea and focus. So I think we should walk them through the village, and
I think everything draws to the church draws you in, doesn't it? So maybe something where you can lead them into the church.
So basically, the starter, if you like, is essentially the walk through the village, the understanding of age. We'll stand outside the church, do all the things we did, look at the size of the church.
But you want them on that plague pit, don't you?
And then,
on that plague pit.
Get them on the plague pit.
They've designed a lesson looking at methodology, encouraging the pupils to behave as historians would, questioning the resources and examining the evidence.
The girls were on a mystery tour. They didn't know why they were here either, and they didn't know what they were studying, and I wanted to use that inquisitiveness that they brought with them to focus their attention on the subject. So the first thing I wanted to do was just to walk them through the village and let them shape their own inquiry, to look for clues. So that's your first task, a very simple task. You're on a mystery tour. This is an extension of the mystery. We're not going to tell you yet why you're here and see if you can come up with it. Okay? So would you like to lead the way, Mr. Anna? Yeah. Follow Mr. Anna, see what we can come up. Talk to each other. It's perfectly reasonable to talk to each other. See what you see, but make sure you have your heads up.
So there's something here that you point out. Can you see any evidence on there? What's the house called?
The Guild House.
Okay. Do we know what a guild is?
Yeah.
Look how the ceiling's moving around. It's not. That's clear evidence of how old it is. Did anyone notice the name of this house, by the way? Market House. Pretty important to spot. Keep looking for more clues. Anything else you see?
So we wanted to move away from just a knowledge-based lesson, which, frankly, the girls could read a textbook or could look at a website to get that information, to something methodological about what does it mean to be a historian in this place with that kind of topic. What could you do? What kind of sources could you draw on?
Give me some clues of some of the things that you've seen. Laura?
The people in this village were quite religious, because obviously you've got the big church and, yeah.
Rachel?
Well, we've kind of discovered that it's kind of quite a Tudor village because it's like really old.
Let's pin you down a little bit, because you're quite right. There are definitely things here that were in the Tudor period. Do we know that this was a Tudor village?
I think one of the lessons we did was about how important the church was in the medieval times. So the fact that it's so big could be something to do with that.
Very good. I'm really impressed, especially the thinking about the church. But I think you've started to think it through. We're in a village. We're going to talk about the medieval period. That gives you a broad sense of historical context. It's a historical event we're going to explore. We'll start thinking about what it might be. We'll take it to the church and see if we can start to narrow it down. Okay? Let's go. You know, the church is the centre of the community, and this church in particular, because it's so big in such a small village, tells a story on its own. I think the girls picked up on that very quickly. Let's sit down a bit, because I just want to talk a little bit about... Are you all right sitting on the grass? Yeah. OK. I want to talk just a little bit about what this sort of church represents. Halfway through the 14th century, about 1348, something happens and it changes this area in quite a marked way, and it's like a big shock. Does anybody know what it might be? What else do you see as you look around? Yes?
You see old graves and things.
Old graves. There's gravestones all around here. There's no gravestones here. Why are there no gravestones here?
Are you going to tell the girls what they're sat on?
Oh!
What you sit on?
Because you said it was graves. They used to be buried people and they covered it all up.
You are sitting on a mass grave of people who died in the Black Death. In 1348, plague, the Black Death, came to England. In 1349, the plague came to this village. This, underneath us, is a mass burial pit. So many people died that they had to be buried en masse.
He was able to bring in a sense of the dramatic with them sat on the plague pit, and he loved that moment when he was able to tell them that they were sat on a plague pit. And it's good teaching. He's not got that veneer of a very, very experienced and very cynical teacher who puts on a mask. Ian doesn't do that.
What's the connection between the horseshoe I have in my hand and the Black Death arriving in Ashwell? Nick.
If the horses maybe were carrying something to market, then they'd and then the horses would get the fleas and then maybe pass it on to the humans.
And the thing that's happening, the thing that makes people move from place to place and carry the plague with them, is trading on market. So the horse, it's like the horseshoe is like a symbol of the movement of people that carried the plague. I'm just going to pass you around a picture that just shows us a bit about how people in an earlier age thought of the Black Death. Who do you think the skeleton represents?
Death, and so he's maybe dying.
Who's the other really important person?
Is it like a monk?
It's a monk, yes. And he's right there at the moment of death as well. Is this proof of anything? Is this proof of what the Black Death was like?
Is it maybe someone's opinion of what it was like? So maybe...
Good, it's a representation, and it's got to be. We're going to go inside the church and we're going to look at some different types of evidence. Here last week, but what we do know from some of this is that this is very old. You know, you're familiar with the idea of graffiti. You know what graffiti is about. People have left their mark here. Some of it's religious, some of it's mysterious, some of it's somewhere down there. It talks about Arsenal. Somewhere on here, I think, what does it say, Mr. Annett? Something about the
archdeacon is an ass.
The archdeacon is an ass. So this is graffiti, and we're familiar with this. I'm going to show you a very different type of scratchings on the wall, writings on the wall, that tells us something about the Black Death. So come with me into the tower. So here we have actual evidence dating right back to the Black Death of how people wanted to record it. It's written in Latin. Who wrote Latin?
I think, would it be like a monk or something?
Can we appreciate the importance of evidence and types of historical record? Can we teach it in such a way that stops it being sort of crude caricature of dreadful disease and frightened people? I think it's important to bring out shades of grey in these stories.
Ian has asked the students to categorise the Black Death quotes supplied by the Museum of London.
Think about your categories, girls, as you go through, please.
I mean, Giovanni, is that Italian? Yeah.
And that will have set off little fireworks in their head and help them to give them a sense of humanness to this process.
You had a few minutes to read them and talk about them. We asked you to classify and categorise. First of all, let's think about what kind of categories could we use? What kind of groupings could we use for them? Rachel?
Like the consequences of it.
Ooh.
Such as, like, it says scarcely a tenth of either sex survived.
It was God.
So I was happy we were able to use them, but we were able to do it in a way that was a bit different from the classroom, and the girls made good use of those. Does it tell us the whole story? Or is there something left out? Let me just read you something. And this is the stories of the village of Ashwell. And it says, in 1349, there is a gap in the series of its court rolls. And its court rolls are what gives us our understanding of what happened. That's where our history understanding comes from, because that was what was written down for us to understand. So we have lots of evidence here, but something that we might want to know about is missing. So your last activity, last thing we're going to ask you to do is just think for a moment for yourself, what do you want to know? Write down on a post-it note any questions you have. Any really interesting questions here that would be good to hear. Laura.
Carolina's question was, how did the Black Death affect the business? Surely there would be less people to sell things to.
Interesting. Sophie?
How did it eventually stop?
Yeah, good. So most of these we'll pick up in the next lesson.
If you've been inspired to try out teaching outside the box, why not contact your local museum or library? They can often lend you resources or put you in touch with local experts who can offer useful information for your lesson. You can find some web links on the page associated with this programme at teachers.tv.
I've taught the Black Death for years, and I don't think I've ever really truly explored the idea that we don't have voices left from the ordinary people.
Being able to teach in such a beautiful, interesting place on such a good topic has been great fun. I'm grateful for the opportunity.